Hello and welcome to another episode of Despite the Challenges, a show where we showcase amazing people who, despite their impeding circumstances and challenges, not only they turn around their own lives, but they go out in the community and do amazing things. Today, we're taking just a little twist out of a regular topic, and I have two amazing guests in my studio. They are going to be telling us the community they serve and people who benefit the services they provide. So today I have Patricia Hart. She is the Executive Director of Womanspace in Mercer County, which is a nonprofit organization providing services to domestic violence victims. And Nicole Morella. She is the Director of Public Policy and Communication with the New Jersey Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Patricia and Nicole, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Tell us a little bit about the organization, about yourself, your organization.
Okay. I, Patricia Hart, I'm the Executive Director of Womanspace. I've been at Womanspace for 22 years and a half. And it's been a pretty amazing experience, starting as a clinical social worker and always interested in women's issues. And so I was really pleased to be able to come to Womanspace and be able to make a difference with a population that I felt so committed to.
So here in New Jersey, as both of you have experienced, we are a pretty diverse population to start with.
Correct.
And 22 years is a lot to stay with one organization, and I'm sure that you have seen and witnessed a whole lot of different types of stories and incidents.
Yeah, one of the things that's really nice about having that long of a tenure with an organization is that you can address issues as they arise. Life changes. 22 years ago, life was extremely different at Womanspace. We had 2 computers. That's it. Now we have computers at every desk and cell phones and the world of the internet and all that involves in terms of our work, stalking and those kind of.
Yes.
So the technology, that's just one aspect, right? That we've seen a huge shift, and so we've had to change the way we work with our clients. We have to not just talk about safety planning in terms of, do you have your important papers, do you have the clothes you need, do you have somewhere to go, but we also now have to look at technology and safety. Do you have a cell phone? Does someone else have access to it? Do you have a computer? Is perhaps there's someone who can access? So that's just one aspect of a huge change in 22 years. But throughout those 22 years, we've been able to address a lot of different issues with very diverse, as you say, population, and mostly learning from them.
Yes, that's true.
That's the key.
Yes.
We want to help, but we aren't the expert in everyone and everything. So we listen to what the needs are and then try to fill those needs. And that's kind of how the 22 years has evolved for me. And I feel grateful to be able to do
Good
that.
to hear that,
Yeah,
and we'll hear
thanks.
more. And Nicole, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Okay, so again, I'm with the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence. We're a state-level advocacy organization with a membership of about 30 domestic violence programs across the state, which include organizations much like Womanspace that provide the crisis emergency services to victims and their families in every county. I've been at the coalition for about a year at this point. I've been working in the domestic violence field for 15 years. I had the opportunity to work with 2 of our other member programs in that time, but started as a court-based victim advocate in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
When I was there getting my master's degree in public policy.
I see. So both of you have outstanding experiences. And Pat, just tell us a little bit more on the domestic violence in general and how your organization is finding the unique population to serve?
Well, I think one of the ways is to really stay in tune to what's going on. And so our goal is to be as present as we possibly can be and as accessible as we possibly can be. Our original growth was around programming, so an emergency shelter, which is accessible 24/7, 24-hour hotlines, we operate 3 of them that are accessible 24/7, transitional housing, non-residential counseling. So trying to, a lot of community education, of course, and volunteer response to the police departments. Our response teams respond to every police department in Mercer County and also the colleges and the state police. So it's how do you possibly be in as many places as you can be? And then it's understanding the unique populations. So starting out with no one who spoke Spanish and recognizing we needed to do a better job in the Latino population. And so the way we do that, and I think the most successful way to do that with any population is partnering with a Latino organization. And in doing that, that community begins to trust you and they begin to understand that you really want to serve them in the way that they need to be served. We listen to them. What do you need? And so in that particular instance, we've gone from a part-time counselor to a third of our counselors who speak Spanish, and about a third of our population is Latino. So it's that, working with the homeless and knowing that's a huge problem now. Women and children are homeless, the largest percentage of them homeless due to domestic violence. So how do we address a homeless population that's also experiencing domestic violence? Well, we partner with Homefront, and we do that. They serve the homeless, we do domestic violence, and we make good partners. We learn about human trafficking and develop a committee, begin to address all those things, ask the right questions. So as each new issue or new population comes into our community, as I'm sure you know, has changed enormously in 22 years. And we need to be able to meet the needs of everyone. So the diversity of our staff is really important to that, I believe.
Absolutely, and the diversity as well as the flexibility of reaching out and being able to provide the services that recipients need, not what's available. And I'm sure that drives a whole lot of new initiatives and programs. And I know Womanspace has been doing a wonderful job, and given that long history and the number of programs that you guys are out there providing outreach and training, etc. Tell us a little bit more about the Deaf Project.
So, as we, I guess this was more of a personal. This was a personal experience, and I thought, why do we not have deaf clients? We know that there are deaf individuals out there, and what do we need to do to be able to reach out to the deaf community? And so the coalition started several years ago to begin to explore accessibility in the deaf community, and brought in a gentleman from the Division of Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and they gave all of our programs TTYs and training on how to use them, and at the time that was the state of the art in terms of the deaf community. And the coalition was at the forefront of saying we need to do this statewide, and so and as with everything else, it changes. So
absolutely,
no one's calling TTYs anymore. No one's using TTYs anymore. And I'm saying, what's going on? We need to figure this out. And somewhat like the model we use with the Latino, we needed to work with the deaf community. And so the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence, the New Jersey Coalition Against Sexual Assault, Womanspace, the Division of Deaf and Hard of Hearing, who have been very supportive, and the New Jersey Association of the Deaf, all of us working together, representatives from those to begin to develop what has become our Deaf Advocacy Project.
Okay.
And the goal is to both train domestic violence and sexual assault agencies, because this is, I am a domestic violence sexual assault agency. I'm not personally, but I am a part of, and I think, we're doing a good job. But until we ask
Yes.
the deaf community, what do they need, we may not be doing as effective a job as we need to. So that's what we started doing. We started listening. What do we need to do? So we started to train the domestic violence and sexual assault programs on the accessibility, on the deaf community, because there's a culture, just like with
Yes.
every nationality and every
Yes.
religion and there's a kind of culture that is involved, and with the deaf community it's the same. So we all learned a lot
Mhm.
about what the deaf community is all about, and then in listening to the three of the women on our committee are deaf, listening to them, we developed a plan to train deaf individuals. So we recruited and trained deaf individuals across the state of New Jersey. So we trained domestic violence programs statewide,
Okay.
and then we trained deaf individuals to be advocates for deaf victims.
Okay. Could you, for our audience, could you expand a little bit on those unique barriers that a deaf person may have in a domestic violence situation than anyone like you and me? So what would be those challenges? So people are aware of, there is added layer of complication.
There is. There
Right.
exactly is. So for a deaf individual who's being victimized, there are many things that might be a little different. One, it's a very closed community. So there's not a lot of confidentiality. People know what's going on. If you go somewhere to get help, people are going to know that you're going somewhere. That is a huge deterrent many times. They don't want people to know what's going on. And so, as unfortunately is true with domestic violence, people want to keep that secret. But if you're deaf, just literally, you have no voice, right? You have no voice. And so you can't scream out. You can't yell for help. You can't call 911 because 911 is a telephone. You can't. So if you're in a crisis, do you really have time to call a relay service, to call 911? Usually not. So just that alone is very restrictive in order to get the help they need. They can't always do the things we take for granted. Pick up the phone, call 911.
A question. Either one of you
Sure.
can comment on it. As majority of the people, either victims or in general population, people tend to hold inside, not share the domestic violence situation. And how often you hear that, I thought that just happens in a relationship. They don't consider a emotional verbal abuse as a domestic violence. How do you find that in a deaf community? Is that something in a common assumption among people, or?
Well, I think, unfortunately, I think broadly in our community, that's an assumption or a belief until maybe it does turn physically violent, or that emotional abuse turns more threatening. We have a tendency to kind of sweep that under the rug, or we don't identify it as being a symptom of a pattern of more controlling and abusive behavior. So yes, I think that, including the deaf community, there probably is that assumption or a belief. Or I think that if we think of relationships too where the victim is hard of hearing or deaf and they're with a hearing partner, some of that emotional abuse may be triggered, or the abusive partner's using the victim's disability as the excuse to degrade them, to demean them, possibly to call them names, to restrict their contacts to the community, to further isolate them. So I do think, unfortunately, though, broadly in our community, we still don't identify emotional and mental abuse as the abuse that it is and the power and control that it tends to illustrate in relationships until it gets, unfortunately, too dangerous.
Too dangerous, yes. The access to information among deaf community, do you think is just a matter of them reaching out, or based on your experiences, do they know that there's help exists?
Well, I have to say, I think that was one of the poignant things about Pat taking on this project and really leading it. Because as she said, prior to this, many years prior to this, going back probably more than 10 years, the coalition had been doing work with the Division of Hard of Hearing and the Deaf. She said we equipped all of our programs with TTY phones. We had been for about 5 to 10 years doing cross-training, where we as domestic violence advocates were going out and training providers in the deaf community. We were inviting them into our programs to train domestic violence staff on how to be more sensitive and culturally competent to victims and survivors coming from the deaf community. But there was still a disconnect. We had, in our minds, created the infrastructure, the education, the tools to hopefully engage and encourage that community to contact us. But as she said, those TTY phones weren't ringing. We weren't necessarily getting that response. And again, statistically, we knew that there were victims and survivors out there not getting services. And so, how important it is to have advocates that are representative of those communities, to be available to go out into those communities and to meet victims where they are and where they're seeking out help, really helps to bridge that gap, I think,
Absolutely.
as opposed to just creating the system and creating the infrastructure and waiting for them to come to us.
How much it has changed in the response when you have the advocates going out there?
Well, right now, having the advocates, the effect has been that they can begin to spread the word. So we finished training our advocates, and we're looking to them to be our emissaries in the deaf community.
I
If
see.
if we think about ourselves, we're more comfortable with someone who's like us.
Yes.
It doesn't mean we discriminate. It simply means that there's a comfort level.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
your language is American Sign Language, if you sign to communicate, it's so much more comfortable for you to share information, if you're in crisis, to be able to talk with someone who speaks your language. And so the goal is
Yes.
to have our deaf advocates, although eventually they'll be going out to meet with deaf clients. Right now, there are emissaries in the deaf community. As I said, it's a very closed community, and so everyone knows everyone, which is
Yes.
something that we've learned. And so we want them to be our spokesperson, to say this is a safe place to be.
I see.
However, in order to be considered a safe place, we need also to look at ourselves. Are we doing, so we changed, we operate 3 hotlines. We now have a texting hotline. So if you're deaf, you can text. Now, you can also call through a relay, but texting is the way people communicate these days, and we thought that would make it easier. We thought we were doing a great job. We were very sensitive. We were really doing good until a deaf woman came to our front door, rang the doorbell because all our programs are locked. The secretary talked through the intercom and said, "Can I help you?" And wondered why no one answered. And so we weren't being as effective. Here she is at our front door, and she can't hear the buzzer. She can't hear the secretary. Luckily, she went around to the back door and started banging on the door, which I really appreciate that she did that. But that was a big eye-opener for us. And I think that no matter how committed you are and how much you think you know, unless you're asking and saying, how can we help you? How can we be more accessible? So there are simple things to do to make yourself more accessible, in addition to all the other things that are, very important to do to respond.
So that's a very good example, and the person was defiant enough to stay and be heard.
She was. I was
Right.
very happy.
So, and those are the kind of examples that make you take a look at what's, like you said, what's working and what's not working. In terms of receiving the services, do you find a lot of challenges? Is there enough support, or are there any other services as a legal help or something that you find that, we covered the basics, but there's still more needed?
I think a part of it is letting folks know what they're responsible to do. So if you're serving the deaf community, you need to provide interpreters. It's not the deaf person, and so we'll get those calls. So who pays for the interpreter? The deaf person? No, it's not the deaf person. So if they need legal help, then there needs to be an interpreter to be able to make that happen. And a lot of that becomes the challenge for everyone, how to make sure that you have the interpreters you need so that people can communicate effectively. So I think a part of how I want to answer is the job is never done because we keep learning how to be better at what we're trying to do. And hopefully that will never stop. But we do have to be willing to acknowledge when we're maybe not doing as good a job as we could. We need to be better.
As you said, it's a learning process.
It is a learning process.
In order to provide services, you need to know what's needed out in the community. As we just talked about, that New Jersey is a pretty diverse community, and you talk about interpreters. And I'm sure that being such a diverse community here throughout New Jersey, you might have bilingual interpreter, etc. So if people listening out there, viewers out there, could be of any assistance to the organization as volunteers, or may need to know more about your services, of course, we can give them the website and contact information. If you needed community support, what would that be?
Well, one of the things that has been very interesting about this project is there's no funding for it. So all of us who are working on it, on the committee, are doing it in our spare time. So we continue to do that. We started a GoFundMe site, and and we use that money to pay for interpreters for our training. We've gotten small grants. The coalition had access to small grant in the beginning. We received a small grant from BlackRock. So we've gotten some small grants, but we've not had kind of wide support. So we really look to the community to help support what I think to be is a critical project to deal with. One of the things that I started to do was look at the numbers, and if using numbers from Gallaudet University, which is a university outside of Washington D.C. that is largely a deaf college. So they're the voice of the deaf, and according to their census data in New Jersey, we have about 69,000 deaf individuals, not counting institutionalized, not counting the elderly who are hard of hearing.
Yes. These are people in their active years.
Who are deaf, deaf
because of the accidental or for whatever reasons.
Birth, it could be many different reasons. And 69,000, that's a lot. And so if you look at the statistics on domestic violence, you were talking about it, 1 in 4. And if you look at the research related to vulnerable populations such as deaf, it's higher.
It's higher. It's
usually
much higher.
higher. Sometimes as much as double.
Yes.
So supposing we even use the smaller amount, which is 1 in 4, we still have about 17,000.
It's one thing to have clients come to our programs and receive the services of our programs, but so many of our advocates help connect victims and survivors to the systems and services outside of ourselves. And it's really critical to have advocates that are knowledgeable about what's available, what that victim has a right to, that services should be providing interpreters, that when they go to court, that's something that they should expect to have, when they go to the police department. And so if you're by yourself as a victim or survivor, you may not know that, or you just may not have the strength or the courage or the ability, for whatever reason, to be able to advocate for those things. And so sometimes having a trained advocate, and especially one from your own community, can be really helpful in to make that process more efficient and more effective for that victim or survivor. But we've been so not only pleased with the work that Pat's done, but appreciative that she really has had an interest in spreading it out beyond Mercer County, beyond Womanspace, and has really striving to make this a statewide initiative. She's been sharing this information with all of the members through our different forums and the different work that we're doing on the trainings, ensuring that we're offering the trainings regionally, so it's not just something that you need to come to Mercer County to receive, but she's worked with us and the member programs to make sure that we're hosting this in different parts of the state so that we do engage interested individuals in the community who have a desire to help to be able to come to one of those trainings and to learn about the work, and then to be able to move forward in that work if that's a desire that they have, and to get that additional training to be available and to be advocates in their community.
So most often you find that it would be the deaf people who would become the ideal advocates. Do you have other advocates too that who can maybe in the capacity of training them or understand their languages or can speak sign languages, can at least be another source
Yes.
if the deaf advocate is not available.
Absolutely. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, so
Okay.
our programs, and I know Pat could probably speak to Womanspace, offers training. So being a domestic violence and sexual violence agency, it's an 80-hour domestic violence, sexual violence training. And so it trains them on all the dynamics related to those different violence and abuses, the services, the legal aspects of it, safety planning. And so that's available to anybody who has an interest. And, you know, as we've talked a little bit about, individuals from all different parts of the community and representative of all different communities are welcome to participate in those processes. And certainly training them, if you're working with a deaf victim or survivor and you yourself don't know ASL, just as we would train around needing to provide services across all different languages, making sure they know how to access interpreters, know how to access language lines, or whatever the service might be that's particular to that victim or survivor would be part of that training.
All right. We will make all the information available, the contact informations, and definitely the GoFundMe page. And if the community members or viewers who are watching and wanted to learn more about the programs or maybe somehow volunteer, you know, so they can contact what the process would be for them to get more information and learn about
if they
it.
know ASL more and more. It's
Yes.
it's a language that's being taught
Yes.
in schools. So.
Just a final question: do you find need in the young adults, the adolescents, and young adults who are getting into relationships or who are just could be being bullied or something like that? Do you have any knowledge of that? This is again a vulnerable community to focus to, not just the people who are in relationships.
Absolutely. I mean, most of our programs, if not all, respond to teen victims, and some of our programs even provide services to teen perpetrators of dating violence. But it's all part of that continuum, right? And so adult domestic violence probably started off earlier on in that person's lifetime. Sometimes it starts as child abuse that they've experienced. Oftentimes it leads to dating violence, and then later on adult domestic violence. So we do see it as an important population to serve, because we see that not only important to address the violence they're experiencing now, but hopefully to prevent it from continuing later in their life, whether they're a victim or the perpetrator of that violence.
All right. Well, I thank you so much for sharing this information with our viewers. And I am sure that there would be a more awareness in the communities. And for our viewers, if you have any questions, please check the phone numbers on our captions and contact either of the agencies. They would be more than happy to provide you more information. Either you are going to be needing services or want to help them in any way. So thank you for joining us. I am host Ritu Chopra. Until next time.